Kristin Beeler is the program director, researcher, and lecturer at Duncan of Jordanstone College of Art and Design at the University of Dundee, Scotland, and has been there since 2023. Before that, from 2002 to 2023, it's 21 years.
21 years.
She was professor of art and coordinator of jewelry and metalwork at Long Beach City College in Los Angeles. She is a graduate of Berea College, receiving a BFA in crafts and applied design with a minor in philosophy. We'll see all of that today. And since 2025, she began a practice-based PhD at the University of Dundee, examining the overlaps between jewelry, landscape, and compassion. And we'll learn about that today. I am going to go 1 second and talk to you about Wendy. Wendy Steiner, who is a distinguished cultural critic, author, and professor whose work bridges literature, aesthetics, and social thought. A Yale PhD and Richard L. Fisher Professor Emerita of English at the University of Pennsylvania. Steiner is renowned for exploring the relationships between visual and verbal art, beauty, and freedom of choice. Her many influential books include The Scandal of Pleasure, Venus in Exile, and most recently, The Beauty of Choice, which examines aesthetics and female agency. Steiner's reviews have appeared in major periodicals. She's received fellowships from Guggenheim and Mellon Foundations. Her work advocates for women's taste and aesthetic freedom as the engines of identity and democracy. Take it away.
So thank you very much, Karen, and I'm delighted to speak to you, and thank you, Kristin, too, without whom I would not be here today. Another distinguished person, Barbara McCallum, who has a chapter in my new book, is with us, too, so you can maybe talk with her. There. So I am trained as an English scholar, but from the beginning I was talking about relations between literature and visual art. And by the time the 60s rolled around, we were getting all kinds of controversies in the arts. The culture wars sort of blew up at that time. And I began to think that there had to be some reason why art was suddenly so controversial in this country. We were used to seeing that sort of thing in totalitarian countries where artists got squashed down all the time. But in America, that hadn't been so much the case. And so the 3 books that I wrote during the 90s and aughts were concerned with, were just thought exercises in what we mean by art, what we mean by beauty, and so on. And I realized in the course of doing this that my training, which was, I went to Yale to graduate school, I was trained in very, some kind of classical thinking about everything, and particularly about aesthetics, where what was beautiful was what made you transcend your normal day-to-day life, your physical body, your history, everything that made you who you are, and enter a realm that was transcendent beyond all that. And that was supposed to be a really good thing, to transcend everything about you. And I began to think, why is it that idea of transcendence is so attractive to people? And on the other hand, why is it that my experience of beauty doesn't seem to leave me behind in that way? And I decided that it was a mistake that had been inflicted on us for centuries now, to be told that what was beautiful was what transcended you as an interested being, that is, a person with interests, personal interest, economic interests, historical interests, family interests, cultural interests, ethnic interests, and so on. And instead, I decided that we shouldn't think of beauty as a property of objects that lifted you up in this way, but it was much more that beauty was a special kind of interaction that we have. We see something or read something or whatever, and we like it. And we not only like it in the course of experiencing beauty, but we see ourselves liking it. And in the course of saying, oh, I like that, I'm moved by that, that's important to me, you suddenly think about who you are. And it's not only you that you're thinking about either, because objects of beauty are presented to you in social contexts, like museums and libraries and so on. And the implication is that other people have found them beautiful as well. So you can go to an art museum and look at something and be totally unmoved by it and decide that's not beautiful for me. But you know that at the same time it must have been beautiful for somebody else or it wouldn't be here. And so the whole experience of beauty, it seems to me, is an experience of increasing self-knowledge in relation to other people, in relation to a social situation. And I got all excited about this. I wrote 3 books that were sort of working on that. And, you know, the last one came out in 2010, and I thought, I have nothing else to say about this. But I was, you know, I'm glad I said it, and most people couldn't care less that I had. And moreover, it was a time when the troubles in the world seem to be increasing greatly. Climate change, wars, fascism, authoritarianism, all the kinds of things that are still with us that are so problematic. And under the circumstances, who needs another book on beauty, I thought to myself. And so I retired soon after that, not out of pique or anything like that, but I decided I wanted to spend my time writing operas and making other kinds of art, and I did. However, I was editor of an exhibition in print for Metalsmith magazine in 2015, and the topic that I chose for that, and which was the one that people applying to be included in that exhibition applied in relation to, was beauty as interaction. So I wasn't totally out of it at that point, but still, I was doing other things. And then, in 2017, this book came out by an evolutionary ornithologist, Richard Oprüm, and it was called The Evolution of Beauty. And I didn't read it until a couple of years later during COVID, when most of us did all the reading that we're going to do for the rest of our lives, right? But I figured, oh, beauty, I'm so sick of it, but here's another book on beauty, might as well do it. And I read it, and it was like just an eye-opener for me, because here's this scientist, I mean, a total, I mean, he does not spend his time thinking about what I think about, who was talking about evolution in exactly the same interactive terms that I was. And what his claim was, I mean, he talks about things like creatures like peacocks and bowerbirds and stuff like that. Peacocks have evolved this incredibly beautiful, male peacocks, incredibly beautiful tail, because female peahens liked them and chose to mate with the ones that had the fanciest tails, as it were. As Prohm writes, talking about Darwin and the whole history of evolutionary talk, mate selection is primarily, in the animal world, is a primarily female thing. It's females who make the choices. Males display, females choose, right? And according to Proom, it's an entirely aesthetic business. It's not preordained by your genes, which peacock you're going to choose or anything. According to him, the choices that females make in the animal world are made according to, when they're made freely, and that's a very important point. When the choices are made freely, they choose according to what pleases them. In other words, they look at something and decide that they're pleased by it, i.e. a male, and that's what they mate with. So I thought, this is totally amazing. Not only that, Proom goes on to say that the choices that females make over eons change the species. I mean, peacock tails get showier. Male human beings lose their fangs. They get larger penises and more flexible ones because women like that. And so on and so forth. There are all kinds of, the size differential between males and female human beings decrease. And all of that, he said, is in order to allow females to choose freely what they want, right? And he gives the example of bowerbirds in the bird king world. Male bowerbirds build these unbelievably beautiful constructions, which are not nests, but what he calls seduction theaters of seduction. And in these absolutely gorgeous, huge constructions, there are alleyways, and the male bird struts and dances during mating season, and female bowerbirds enter this thing and go shopping. They go from bowerbird nest to bowerbird nest and sort of check out the dancing, check out the architecture, and decide which one they want best. And according to Proom, the bowerbirds who attract more females and therefore whose genes get passed along more than others are the ones who leave an escape route. So that, somehow the word gets around, or females perceive this when they enter the thing. Oh, Helen, you can't sit in that. Come sit down. And so, in the animal kingdom, there is a built-in drive for freedom of choice. So, I mean, suddenly, what I was writing about, my idea of interactive beauty, suddenly became to me, a much more important kind of notion. And I'll read you just a short passage. Evolutionary biologists from Charles Darwin to Richard O. Proom designate females the choosers when it comes to mate selection. Their choices determining which mate genes will be lost and which will live on in future generations. Moreover, these scientists describe female mate choice, when not coerced, as aesthetic in nature, an expression of taste, of what delights and attracts a given female in a mate. As descendants of female choosers in the animal world, women thus inherit a special relationship to aesthetics, one in which taste, identity, and freedom are existentially connected. The effects of women's self-expression extend far beyond their individual lives. From primordial times to the present, women's pleasured tastes and choices have shaped humankind as we know it. Aesthetics is women's way of creating what it is to be human. So that made me pretty excited, and I started thinking about that. On the other hand, there's nothing more dangerous than writing about evolution, in the world of the humanities. I mean, because you can imagine the reasons. So I took my life in my hands to do this, and I wrote this book, The Beauty of Choice, and it talks about beauty and identity. And I decided that I would go for it as long as I was sort of ditching Kant and my whole background and everything. I would ditch Descartes as well and rationalism. And instead of cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, I like therefore I am. And there you have it. So, and then as soon as I did that, I started coming across these incredible examples from the past. So here's the pillow book of Sei Shonagon, which was written around the year 1000 in Japan. She's a courtier, perhaps probably a courtesan in the imperial court. Famous for her poetry and her music playing and everything else, and most accomplished, whatever. And she writes this book called The Pillow Book, and a pillow book is a kind of compendium, a kind of diary, commonplace book, that kind of idea, which is full of lists of things she likes, 168 lists of things that she likes. And it just, you know, like in point form, goes on and on. No, it's about other things too, but it, you know, that's quite remarkable, and there she is. And she talks about, at a certain point, about how, why she cares so much about what she likes. And she says, it makes life worthwhile. She says, when I look at the beautiful hem on this woven thing, it makes my life worthwhile, she said. So, I agree. And here, the Wife of Bath's tale. The Wife of Bath, well, of course, this is by Chaucer, a man, but the Wife of Bath is a character who tells one of the Canterbury Tales. But as a character, she is all over the place in European folklore. And the tale that she tells in the Canterbury Tales is all over the place in European folklore. The theme of it is, or the nub of it is, that a knight has raped a maiden and he's condemned to death unless he can find the answer to the question in a year and a day, what do women want most? So you take away female agency in rape, which is the archetypal case of that, and you are condemned as punishment to go and seek out what women want, to immerse yourself in that. And the knight, it's a wonderful story. It's so nasty, and then really, the knight really gets his in this, so I like it a lot. And here, this is the very last sentence of James Joyce's Ulysses, in which two male characters, you know, lord it over us for 900 pages or whatever it is, telling us everything in world culture from everywhere at every time and every place. But the very end of the book is given over to a female character, Molly Bloom, who is the wife of one of the other characters. She's lying in bed, and it's a monologue. She's remembering the day that Bloom proposed to her, and she accepted. And the very last words of the book are, and yes, I said yes, I will, yes. And, you know, so, you know, after all of human exploits, culture, history, literature, and everything else, this one sort of formulation of female choice is the one that caps off that book. And I found that to be truly astonishing on Joyce's part. So female choice, of course, we live, and what was going on at the same time was Me Too. And I began to think of Me Too as like the female bowerbirds who are rejecting bowers that don't have an escape route, right? This is another movement to protect women's freedom of choice. And I write opera librettos, and I wrote a song cycle that had several stanzas, and this one, or the one that this was for, was one that was all about the problems in the culture of the moment. But the composer chose not to compose this one. And so I saved it and I present it to you. So in other words, these are song lyrics, so it's not going to sound like a proper poem, but our founding fathers framed no articles on pussy. The word arrived in the archives century later via a bus driving to make America great again. 1 million women crocheted woolen wombs in answering shades of shocking pink and marched for life and liberty, mocking a man's pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. So this was in response to the Women's March, of course, after the inauguration of the first inauguration of the president. So in my book, I deal with the idea of coercion and Me Too and so on. And one chapter is devoted to this extraordinary monument in Kosovo, which is one of the very few memorials to raped women. There are tons of war memorials of various sorts, as you know, throughout the world, and they commemorate various things, but almost none of these memorials remembers the women who were raped during war. And in Kosovo in 1998 to 99, during the Serbian invasions and incursions into Kosovo, one of the standard tactics of war was to rape Kosovar women. And it's, according to a United Nations study, there were over 20,000 women who were raped. So in the early, around 2010, plans began to make a memorial to these women. And the winning design was this one, which is a huge metal sculpture. What it did, and there's a close-up, and this is an even closer close-up. What the artist did to get the shape of the face is to average photographs, to run 1 million photographs of Kosovar women through a computer and come up with an average face, which gave him the total one. And then he replicated it on the heads of these pins you can see that create the relief in the sculpture that's up there. And the idea is he called the women who had been raped, he called them heroines. Heroinat is the in Albanian. And the idea is he's giving each one of them a medal. And each head of a pin there, it represents one of the women who were raped. There are 20,000 that make up the relief on this sculpture. And it's a very controversial work within Kosovo, but because according to the customs of the country, women who are raped are treated as guilty of crimes themselves, as criminals, and not the rapists. And it's a sign of incredible, not only shame but guilt on their part, and they. It's so works like or artworks like this are meant to overcome that. I have a whole chapter on this. There's a great deal to say, but we need to get to Kristin. So the cover of my book uses a detail from that. And I also have chapters on 3 wonderful women artists, 2 of whom are here. So the first. Barbara McCallum, who are related to these ideas of freedom and female choice. Barbara is married, has been married for over 50 years to her husband, whose name is Robert Johnson, and he is a planetary physicist. And in order to work out their marriage together, she takes off prints of his work and washes them and boils them up and shreds them and bakes them and sews them together, pieces together that retain the print often of these things. And it's a way of putting his scientific endeavors and her artistic endeavors together. So this detail shows you how the print on these garments comes together. And she sews the pieces up into beautiful, beautiful garments, which she then overlays on a cast of part of the body of her husband. And so she dresses him in art in this way, but an art that is made of his art, and that turns his dry science into her juicy art. And there's another piece, and the titles come from the titles of the scientific article that so stimulated desorption of atoms and molecules from bodies in the outer solar system. You know, that's what she starts with. And Marlene Dumas, who is a world famous oil painter, just an absolutely wonderful painter, who herself has sort of reworked male modernism into an art about female desire and female self-expression and so on. So and she lives in Amsterdam, and this Barnett Newman is in the Stedelijk in Amsterdam, you know, a classic piece of abstraction, and she recreates it as with the same title. Or here, Pablo Picasso's Weeping Woman, and she turns the tables on it by painting from a photograph by Man Ray of Dora Maar, painting an image of the woman who is seen crying in that, but here she's watching Picasso cry, and so it's a different kind of agency that's involved. And then, and here is my last example, Kristin Beeler, whose work is connected to all these ideas in a very different way, in that she is exploring interactivity in terms of, or was in this long series that she did called Rag and Bone, where she got to know certain people who had disfigurements of one sort or another, scars or injuries or so on. And she interacted with them and became friends with them and knew them, and then represented this is a mastectomy scar, transformed their disfigurement into a work of jewelry art. And using, and she can explain all this better than I, and I'm not going to take up any more of your time, but using beautiful natural materials and remaking their bodies for them through art. And here's another one. This is the Venus de Milo. This is. I know, but I didn't know whether I was supposed to mention it or not. She had just had an operation on her neck, and there was a scar, and so Kristin and she went into a room and she got all dressed up in sheets and so on, and they took this version of the Venus de Milo with a scar. A rather beautiful scarf. So that, without further ado, I hand it over to Kristin.
Thanks so much, Wendy. It's amazing hearing you talk about your work. So thank you. This was actually, I was in the middle of doing this work and telling Suzanne Ramiak about it at a SNAG conference. And she said, "Oh, I just have a scar." And so we ran up to the hotel room and did draping, and it was sort of an amazing experience. But I first encountered Wendy's work in 2007. I had an exhibition at Velvet Da Vinci called Beauty and Other Monsters, which was a sort of a culmination of study of what beauty meant to me in kind of a full picture. And this was one of the pieces that was in there. And Wendy, who has this amazing capacity to see things obvious things that I don't see, said, "Oh, it's the work that you're doing now. They're like big goiters. I was like, oh, I've already done that. So I was reading Wendy's work at this time. I'd read Venus in Exile and was taking a lot of things in about beauty and working with a lot of mother of pearl. I spent many years carving mother of pearl, working with it, and kind of because it's such a beautiful material, but it has all of these very layered meanings. It's not an easy material either. It's very pretty, but it's not easy either intellectually or working with it as a material. I'm also really interested in it as a climate archive. I'm interested in how it grows, where it grows, how it affects local cultures. And Bernd Schöne is actually a paleontologist at the University of Germany. It's escaped my mind now. But his study is in shell as a climate archive. And there is much more interest growing about how oyster shell becomes sort of this embodiment of what we're doing to the oceans. But I'm also interested in how it plays out in art history. Sorry, this one is not labeled, but how shell has this sort of global capacity to capture people's imaginations across time. And I picked up what I've begun to call a kind of pearl logic, that a central theme or some sort of damage happens, and then layers of experiences are built around that. And Wendy, in her book, calls it infoliation. So rather than taking layers off, exfoliation, that it's actually giving shape to an experience by adding layers on. And so this was a piece that I had done for that show at Velvet Da Vinci, where years before I'd broken a pearl, and to me it had made it better. It helped me to think about that measurement of beauty. And that's part of what I was looking at, was how do we measure, how do we calculate what or who or if a thing is beautiful. In more recent years, what I've done is thinking about that beauty and its relationship to landscape, and in particular the landscape of the body. As Wendy mentioned, I just ended up knowing people, and I started talking to them about traumatic injuries that they had. And just I had been documenting the physical landscape just sort of around where I was in Arizona or California. But then I started thinking about the damage to the body landscape and what that does to people and how it transforms their lives in ways that we don't see. And I started talking to them and recording and archiving their experiences and making work that was about their experience and literally mapping the landscape of their bodies and finding the territory that was there in a really intimate way. And because I was spending so much time talking to them about their experience, it made me really keenly aware of how I could spend time in their experience. I could step into it. I could have a literal sort of Einfühlung, feeling into empathy for them, and then I could walk away. And I realized the privilege that was in that, of being able to simply walk away from their experience. And every time I came back to making these pieces, I stepped back into their experience. And it made me very, very aware of how easy it can become to leave. There was, how do you call it, when you just get tired, like an empathy exhaustion that we suffer listening to these polarized conversations in the world, and we become inured to it. We stop listening in the same way. And with these pieces, I had to go back. That was the job, was to go back and continue to listen and be with that person inside of their experience, and to document it for them and with them. And in some cases, they contributed in various ways. We talked about what they might be interested in. And we talked about how it changed things for them, how it moved their experience. And that was the thing that became really, really interesting about this work, was how it changed their experience, how it changed how they talked about it. So this was one of the pieces that was in that group of called Archive of Rag and Bone, and this is an ongoing series that I'm doing. And the piece that I made in response to this body landscape was this very long necklace. The chain that is there is modeled after a Gunter's chain, which is 66 feet of chain, which is used for surveying. It's an old surveying device, and it's literally it's a tool that is used to turn landscape into territory, and it's very, very interesting. But that oval, I'd been using this ellipse kind of consistently over the years. And what occurred to me as I was thinking about this exhibition was how I might bring that in, because it kept reminding me of, from that work, I actually started thinking about a PhD, because I was really interested in it, and now I've started my PhD at the University of Dundee part-time. It will take some wee while to get through that. But the pivot point for my PhD is based in where landscape, jewelry, and compassion overlap. That is what is interesting to me. And it's early days of my PhD. I'm having to sort of map out the things that I'm interested in and where I want to go, and working with my supervisors to do that. And so it's a bit woolly at the moment, just trying to think about, what am I talking about, and what are all the threads that I want to pull, and how am I going to pull them all together? And of course, it's not a PhD, it's eventually a book, or I don't know, an epic movie or something that this will become. But that's kind of where it starts, is knowing what the threads are. And all of this is happening in the landscape of Scotland now, which is remarkably different to the landscape of Los Angeles, where I was. And it is not all castles and unicorns, but it's a lot of castles and unicorns. This is frost on my car windshield one morning. It just happens like that. There'll be these magical, magical moments where landscape just comes in and transforms you. And it's happened that way in Scotland for centuries, eons. And it's become one of these places where I've just noticed how ingrained the landscape is, working with students and working with my colleagues at Dundee and Edinburgh and Glasgow. I see how they respond to landscape every single day. They think about it as part of their work, and sustainability has always been. Sustainability is not a new thing. It's just now the word that they put to what they do. So I have been working a bit with the National Museum, Sarah Lawrenson at the National Museum Scotland, going through the jewelry collection. She wrote a really fabulous book that I'll tell you about later. But Scotland's jewelry history is embedded in the landscape, and it has always been this way. And so this is agate, Scottish agate, and gold that is part of the collection and is a piece from her book. And man, that is a fun day going through the collection with her. But this is what you see when you are in Scotland. And so part of the inspiration for the exhibition came from the stream. And there was a stone that was in that stream as I was looking up at the Red Castle in the Lunan waters, that the stone looks like body. It looks like body. And so the stone that I pulled out, when I pulled it out of the water, it was literally like reaching into the water and pulling out my own heart. But the thing that has really been transformational for me from Los Angeles was wood. How much wood, and the interventions that you see between the wood in the landscape and the human interaction. And there's this management of woodland that has always been a part of the Scottish landscape. So what you're seeing here is those growth rings that I was very interested in shell, are now, I'm seeing them in, looking at them in trees, and I have so many pictures of pieces of wood. And, but then there's these saw cuts that come in, and that intervention that happens, and then it grows over, and you see the patterns that form. This is one of my favorites. It's just, you know, that's just walking down the road. It's just so incredibly beautiful. So with those things in hand, I went back to this piece, and I kept thinking about the form of it and how it reminded me of something. And as I was moving studio, which was some process, I kept coming back to this image that has lived in my studio since I was in some form since I was in graduate school and studying Latin American art. This was a cover I ripped off of the art bulletin. This was a portrait. It's a portrait of a coronation of a nun. And the shape of this object, it just seems such a surreal image. It took a number of years before I could understand what I was looking at. But these are coronation images of nuns who have entered the Hieronymite order from Spain, and lots of them went to Mexico. And when they went to Mexico, at this time, 16th century, women had two choices. And that was it. You got married or you went to the convent. And the Hieronymite order, it was a wealthier order, but it was also the order that allowed intellectual pursuit. And so for women who were interested in intellectual pursuit, that was often where they tried to go. And so these big badges that they wore on a daily basis, this was part of their uniform. They're called escudo de nuña, and they're shields. They're literally called shields. And they are really that large. There's a really beautiful one at the Metropolitan. This one is in another location. But I was really being drawn to the sense of power that they got, this identity that came from that and from their choices. Many people may know this is a Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. Thank you. And yeah, she is kind of a spear point. She was a prolific writer. She was an intellectual of the time. She was supported by the Viceroy of Spain and his court. And yeah, you see a lot of nodding there. Yeah, a very, very powerful character during her time. And she had an immense library. She had scientific and musical instruments. And so, of course, her portrait is in her library with her books and with her intellectual tools. And of course, it got her into trouble. And eventually, she had to sell off all of the things. And at the end of her life, there's evidence that the only thing that she had left was her escudo. To me, these had a relationship to Tibetan Gao, which are prayer boxes that are worn every day by Tibetans. And this is, I've had one for decades that is just this sort of inspirational piece. But they also have a relationship to prayer nuts, 16th century prayer nuts. And these were carved in boxwood, and they were devotional objects, the sort of grounding objects. And so as I'm developing work for the show, these are the things that are kind of washing over me. And as part of my PhD practice, I'm taking in more drawing and thinking about drawing really kind of loosely. And part of what I was doing, I started calling rhetorical drawings. One of the properties of a proper geometric ellipse is that it has two focal points. And if you've ever been in a whispering gallery, if you stand in one point and you say something, the sound will travel perfectly to the next point. And I thought, how beautiful and how elusive is that in a world where conversations are at odds all the time. And so thinking about polarizing conversations, You may be familiar with Reverend Budd's comments requesting mercy at the beginning of the year. I was in Scotland and was, because empathy is now my business, I took it really personally, the response that came about empathy. Empathy becomes toxic when it encourages you to affirm sin, validate lies, or support destructive policies. Whose sin? The fundamental weakness in civilization is empathy. That guy. And then Budd's attempt to speak truth to power is a reminder that feminism is a cancer that enables the politics of empathetic manipulation. Joe Rigney wrote The Sins of Empathy, which is a widely read book in conservative circles and very influential. And in response, there were two responses that I found to be really, really beautiful that I wanted that to be my language. I wanted to make that my choice of what comes into the conversation. And so Micah Budd in Busey here in New York said, if empathy is a sin, sin boldly. And then Canon Daly in Washington National Cathedral says, this God of ours, he welcomes the sinners and he eats with them. So the Sin Eater is an old folk tale. I'm sort of coming to the end of this, but it's a very old folklore that I grew up with as a child in the Appalachian region. It comes from the Welsh, Scottish, and English folklore, and there isn't a lot of documentation about it because it was really spooky and it was something that you told to children to scare them. But this is actually from Atlas Obscura. There's actually some fairly nice documentation that is there. But I really wanted, originally the title of the show was going to be Sins of Empathy, trying to reverse direction on Joe Rigney's book. And then I decided what I want to do is I want to step into this other, rather than meeting transgression with retribution, to think of it openly, to have work that opens up to that. And so I decided to call it The Sin Eaters. Wendy and I talked a lot about books, and so we made some recommendations, and there's also, our websites are on there. I have Joe Rigney's book at the bottom of my not recommended or suggested reading, but I think it's good to know what is actually being said and to read it. I had to read it myself. I needed to see the words myself. I felt like I needed to take a shower afterwards, but I still wanted to read it. But there's, I love Wendy's recommendation of Frankenstein, which it was partially written in Dundee. But these are, so that was kind of a fast walkthrough. So there we go. Do you want it? Do you have time for questions?
Yeah, no, well, I was going to say, unless you guys, yeah, we certainly have time. I just turned that off so you guys could talk to each other about it.
Do you want to take questions, or did you have? Sure. Do questions? Yeah. Let's see. I mean, we can always talk
We
to each
can always talk.
Yeah, we can go back to that argument that we had yesterday. It was a really good one. Yeah. So yeah, thoughts.
Can you touch on the folklore with the Sin Eater and like what that story kind of is?
Yes. So. Yes. So the question was, what is the folklore of the Sin Eater? So there's various versions that kind of float around. The version that was told to me as a child, and I had a great uncle who was a master storyteller. He was an auctioneer, and he was he's actually recorded at the Smithsonian. He was just sort of a character for sure, and he loved to scare little children. So he would talk about the Sin Eater, and the Sin Eater was a person in the community, often referred to as an outcast, but that's not necessarily the case. But these were all in very remote regions, and the Sin Eater, when someone died in the community, it may take some wee while before someone of the clergy could come in to bless and sacralize the body for burial. And so the sin eater was a paid person. It's often referred to as one of the worst jobs in history, to actually eat a small meal off the chest or off the coffin of the body, thereby consuming the sin so that the person can pass over. It's been likened to the idea of a scapegoat in a broader sense. Some people refer to Christ as his role as being, coming into the sins of the world. There's also I can never pronounce the name of the Aztec goddess, who is the filth eater. So there are things across history. Lori Talcott is going to talk about the sin eaters also in her talk. So it kind of has multiple cultures that it belongs to, but it's always about that openness to compassion and empathy at a physical level.
Well, and also you told me that because the sin eater ate the meal off the chest, yes, that the connection to the escudos suggested itself. At Kristin's direction, I read a certain amount about escudos, which are fascinating. They were these huge things, these huge objects that nuns had to wear all day, except that they were exempted for a couple of hours to do other things, but basically they wore it all the time. And it is an alternative to jewelry, because they were supposed to be giving up their worldliness and to become nuns. But on the other hand, they were beautiful paintings, and they were often, some of them used precious materials in the frames and so on. So, but they also look like lockets. But they didn't open, and they look like oval mirrors. And because they reflect the vows and the values of the nun who wears them, they become an exteriorization of the interior of the nun herself. And so it's a picture of the insides of that person coming out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good way of saying it.
I'm picturing these nuns going, my eyes are up here.
Shane?
I know when you were in Southern California, you would often share images or videos of like what you would collect, like your house was full of objects that were made or remade. I'm wondering now in your new home if you're doing something similar, and how that's reflecting from the history and culture.
You would not believe how much wood I have now. People give me wood all the time. Scotland, they find out that you like something, and a couple of weeks ago, I had everything laid out on my dining table, and my dog walker came through, and he said, "Oh, what are you doing with all of these? Where's the wood coming from?" And I told him the story, and I come back the next week, and there is a log on my dining room table. Like, I'm leaving it there. That is perfect. So yeah, and I have. For years, I've had kind of a collection of wooden objects that now lives in my studio that is just kind of daily information that comes in. I still have all of the mother of pearl, and that comes into the PhD work as well, but in a different level.
Well, and then jute is like a big thing.
Jute is huge. Yeah, textiles are huge there. Yeah.
You know
Christina?
Christina Day?
Not yet. Okay. So Susie.
I wanted to jump back to the image. Do you think that those were heavy? Like, how heavy were those meals?
Can you repeat? So the question is how heavy the escudos were? They were, most of the materials that I've seen, they were painted on copper. So they were large, but it probably would have been fairly thin sheet copper. There are some at the Metropolitan, and eventually I'm going to get over there to see them. But they're scattered around. There were some when I was living in California and Arizona, lots still in Mexico. But it's tortoise shell, a lot of it, some bone. They probably weren't super heavy. It was more the scale that was really awkward. And remember, they were doing it during their regular activities, their chores and things. So it was. I don't think that they were super uncomfortable, is what I'm saying. They were. You would have known that it was there. Like, they're massive. They're as big as your head. But I haven't had a chance to pick one up yet. Yeah, over here. Yes.
What are the effects that you can see in the layers of the pose?
The question is, how do you read pearls and shell in particular as a climate archive? I'm not as well versed in that as I'm going to be, but it's pearl, the nacreous layer of shell and pearl is responding to temperature and pH of the ocean. And so what I'm particularly interested in is Victorian, Edwardian, like there's all these things that were made of mother of pearl, lots of buttons and parasol handles and lots of implements that were sort of upper class tools. And those pieces are massive. They would have come from clamshells that were like this. And some of the thicknesses, I have a sample that's kind of over tucked in there. And you'll see the layers that are in there. So as the seas are warming, you'll see thinner layers. It becomes more difficult for the nacreous layer to form. The proteins don't bind. And so over time, they're pretty sure that there are going to be multiple species that die out because they simply can't form the shell. Helen's got a question.
No, are your mother of pearl specimens in California or in Scotland?
Oh, it's all in Scotland now.
Because now you can't transfer it back.
Don't say it out loud. Yeah,
Been through that with customs.
it's tricky.
They took away all the mother of pearl, all the coral,
Oh,
and
wow.
all the ivory.
I shipped it as art supplies.
You're not going to get away with it.
Yeah, it's already there. So it's there.
But you can't
Yeah,
get it back.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's very
You won't be
tricky.
able to get it back to California.
Yeah. Well, that's where it's going to stay, is in Scotland for sure. Karen.
I'd like to hear about the argument you two had.
It was about the word recommended readings at the end. I am not going to recommend that anybody read those.
Yeah, the sins of empathy.
Yeah, you know, but don't forget, I though I'm retired, I live in a university kind of world, and you know, nobody's going to take the time to try and understand in my world why you would recommend something that is heinous. You know, it's like saying I recommend that you read Mein Kampf. No, I do not. I mean, on the other hand, read it if you want to understand what the other side thought. But I don't want to be the one.
Yeah, it's pretty icky business for sure. But I'd actually read something years ago that after World War II, it was surprising how many Germans had never read Mein Kampf. They didn't actually know what was in it. And it was like, how many people read Project 2025? Not that many.
You did.
Yeah.
I just had a question. I didn't read it. No, you didn't. I was just curious why you recommended Frankenstein. I've noticed a huge resurgence in like Gothic literature, Gothic movies being made recently. I was just curious how you feel it kind of.
Frankenstein is one of the great treatises on beauty. And in Venus in Exile, one of those books I showed the cover of at the beginning, I have a chapter on Frankenstein. Frankenstein, the monster, is a creation by a man, a male mother, in effect. I mean, takes body parts and puts them together. And it's about the creation of an offspring without any concern for its well-being. So, Dr. Frankenstein creates this monster. He's horrified when he sees it stand up with all its scars and monumental size, and he expels it. And this baby, which is what Frankenstein is loosed into the world to take care of itself, and becomes acculturated by looking through the windows, like the little match girl and all that kind of stuff, looking through the windows and seeing how people who love each other behave in families. And the reason that he is expelled in this way is that he's not beautiful, right? That he's ugly and repellent and disfigured and all those things. So, and Mary Shelley, or the narrator, spends a lot of time in the book talking about the relationship between his physical appearance and the way that he functions in the world and so on. It's a brilliant book. I mean, a really brilliant book. I do recommend that book.
Would you mind rewinding to the slide with the mastectomy scars and the piece that you did related to that? I just wonder if you would comment a little bit about what you're trying to get across with that.
It's all the way back in mine, the second last.
Yeah. Yeah. So, can you tell me while I'm very slowly going backwards?
Well, it was the mother of pearl. I think it was like a brooch that that you created in relationship to some scarring. Yeah. So I was intrigued when Wendy was is it Wendy?
Yeah.
Yeah, was speaking about it, and I thought we might hear more about it. And
There.
then we moved on. So I wondered if either one of you would kind of expound a little bit on this piece.
Do you want to say something?
Well, as the one who did not make it, I can say a couple of things, and then that's a piece of jewelry on the right, but it's also a prosthesis for a breast. And I tried to imagine what it would be to buy that and wear it. Where would you wear it?
Right.
If you wore it, what a thing it would be. Is it your breast that you're emphasizing in this way, or is this? Are you superimposing the absent breast of this mastectomy person on your breast, taking on that disfigurement? And it just seemed to me so full of emotional resonance as a thing to do. And at the same time, it's a little bit naughty, it's
She was
very.
a bit naughty. Yeah.
She was a little bit naughty, right? And to wear it on your breast would be sort of naughty. It would just be complicated, right? So that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, and I think that Wendy kind of touches on an important point about these pieces is that they might be worn by the person that inspired them, but often they're going to be worn by someone else. And by doing that, you are literally stepping into someone else's experience. And that was part of the idea that I started going with was how do you make these so personal that they're a bit unsellable,
Yeah.
which I'm okay with. But it's because you have to really want to understand that person's experience.
Is there a reason why the?
We have one more question, and we got
Hi. I also come from an animation background, right? And basically, you know what caricature is, right?
yeah.
Yeah, basically, and a lot of emphasis on caricatures is, mostly just, finding the uniqueness, in the person themselves, and then it's absolutely just, bringing it to the forefront. And, you've seen caricature before, right? Yeah, basically, of course, caricature, well, I also like to think about it as more so as, a celebration of a person, appreciating your differences, and I guess, when working in an animation environment, it is a very different, way to view things, and, in people's, physical and mental personality, everything differences, than other people, if that makes sense. And like, and I guess like your talk about like what we perceive as beautiful, it kind of made me like think about that. Like, what I'm trying to go and say is, what do you think about that in relation to how beauty and how is viewed as interaction? Words are hard.
Take your time. So is your question how does this kind of shape how we think about beauty and interaction through?
Yeah. And that's what I was like asking. Or just like, how do you think like that would relate to caricature and viewing it in that way?
So like putting things into high contrast so that.
Things in high contrast are just like finding this like putting like something that helps someone might even be like really insecure about and just putting it to the forefront and like.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
I see your question. Yeah.
And it's not like animators like think of it as a bad thing. It's like it's just like a really different way of just like viewing things. Do you get what I'm saying?
I think so.
Yeah.
And I think possibly the answer to your question is that all of the people that I documented, these were part of long ongoing trust relationships that had been established. And so information that they gave me, they volunteered. It was what they wanted to volunteer, what they want to even have public in a lecture or or published online. That was all what they were comfortable with. And if they were not comfortable with something, then absolutely, there are lots of things that are not shown.
Oh yeah.
But it was about the documentation and changing their relationship to the experience.
Oh yeah. Because like I wouldn't like actually like caricature like a random person off the street without their permission because like again it's like it could be like a make or break thing. Like I guess it's like what I'm trying to say is like you know what I mean?
Sure.
It's like I do like doing caricature even though it's like I want to get better at it. Like I'm pretty amateur, but like I'm trying to go and say it's just like also with that it's also like a personal thing for like the character. The more you know the person's better character is going to be.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the question.
I'd like to ask a question. So could be one last one.
I'm
Fascinated by the concept of sin eater. And
It's rich.
yeah, and many cultures have someone stay with the dead after they're dead. And I just looked up some of the Orthodox Jewish tradition because you often have someone who sits with the dead in respect. And washes them. Yes. But there is that element. I once spoke to a rabbi about this because that is an interesting, that you pull out all of your negative sin from the person, and this is a cross-cultural. So that was very interesting.
There's a novel about sin eaters, and I don't, it's hard to tell how much of it is based on fact, but in it, the sin eater actually comes to the dying as opposed to the dead and gets a kind of confession of sins from them, each sin of which is correlated to a different food, and therefore, and the members of the family provide those foods in the meal that the sin eater consumes. It's sort of, and so you can, the sin eater has a record in effect and consumes a record of those sins.
Okay, thank you. I mean, you got.